Okay, good morning, everyone. Hello. We'll begin now. I'm seeing quite a few names in the attendee list. It's wonderful to see familiar names, but also welcome to those of you who are joining us for the very first time. We have a great panel lined up today, but before we begin, just let me mention a few housekeeping notes. So as you might have noticed, participants are in listen-only mode and the chat is closed, but we welcome and encourage you to submit your questions, but also comments and any thoughts that you have throughout the webinar using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens. We'll have a moment to answer at least some of the questions live, but also it's great to see your thoughts and how the discussion especially is relevant to your work. Translation is also available through closed captioning. So if you click the show captions button at the bottom of your screen in the controls bar, you should be able to select your preferred language from the list that we have available. Also, be sure to look out for some follow-up communication. We'll share the recording and also any materials mentioned, websites, links throughout the discussion that will be shared as well. Today's webinar on engaging women for philanthropic support is part of our series on sharing best practices in fundraising. And the series is designed to help nonprofit professionals worldwide enhance their fundraising practices, but also just learn from each other. And for those of you who are not familiar with Myriad USA or just need a refresher, we facilitate giving across borders. Myriad USA provides US donors with a simple and efficient platform to support nonprofit initiatives abroad, anywhere across the globe. We also partner with foreign nonprofits, some of you are in the room, and offer them cost-effective solutions to receive tax-deductible gifts from donors in the United States. That's done through a service called American Friends Funds. Note that Myriad USA is a member of Myriad, the Alliance for Borderless Giving. And we have sister organizations based in Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Hong Kong. So if you have donors in any of these countries and regions, we can help you as well. And if you wish to learn more, please don't hesitate to reach us at info@myriadusa.org. That's also in the chat for you. And now I am excited to begin the panel and introduce and hand it over to Kathleen, who will moderate today's discussion. Kathleen Loehr is the principal of Kathleen Loehr and Associates. She has over 35 years of experience in partnership with university and nonprofit leaders, as well as philanthropists. Kathleen is a national thought leader and expert regarding the role of women in modern philanthropy, plus their role more frequently in the philanthropic driver's seat, given the increased money being earned, inherited, and their influence in the household giving. Kathleen translated the research on how women give into practical actions fundraisers can take. Her book, Gender Matters, A Guide to Growing Women's Philanthropy, was published by Case in August 2018. And she is the former chair of the Advisory Council for the Women's Philanthropy Institute at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. Kathleen, welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to you to begin the discussion and introduce the rest of the panelists.
And thank you, Maryna. Thank you, Myriad. Thank you all for being here today. It is so exciting to be talking globally about women's philanthropy. If you're in here, you're ready to learn about how you can gain significant support for your nonprofit by paying attention to those who identify as women. So we're going to give you lots of highlights about specific approaches that work. And we're also going to provide you with resources you can take away. So there's a lot here. Get your questions ready, write things down, don't miss a beat, because there's so much that's possible when you start paying attention to those who identify as women. And you're going to hear about the multi-pronged way that support will come your way with this attention. Now, you might notice that I'm using the phrase, those who identify as women, and that's important. It's the full spectrum of those who use that identity. When we talk about women's philanthropy, the research has been going deep into all this, and across 15 years of deep attention, we have specific research for this group. And with this group, we now can share a lot of details about how you can get started. So I really want you to understand that we're diving into what was before called an unseen group. Women were not paid attention to. So today we're talking about those who identify as women, but listen, because you're going to pick up practical ideas of how you can approach in a relational way with all those who are unseen and are ready to step up or give more to your own nonprofit. We are learning that we no longer can apply old best practices to all donors. Our donors are so diverse, they're so different. We may no longer be able to use fundraising practices unilaterally. So today we're talking about those who identify as women and how they are different from how we used to do fundraising in the 1970s when it was primarily white, primarily straight, and primarily male. So to help us unpack how we approach those who identify as women, we have two great experts here. I'm really pleased to introduce Lyndi Liersemann and Jackie Ackerman. Lyndi has worked at Mercy Corps, a global organization supporting communities to build long-term results and resilience. She's been there more than a decade. And as the director of Mercy Corps' Women's Philanthropy Group, she's created a collective of passionate women who are really committing themselves and all their resources to new pathways for women to lead their communities to fight against climate change. She deeply understands relationship building and has translated relationship building across the board for fundraising to specifically what works for the Mercy Corps Women's Philanthropy Group. So you're going to hear what she has learned, but also what she's had to unlearn to graze the significant resources that have already come forward. Jackie has been at the Women's Philanthropy Institute since 2012. She's been leading the research, and you should know that because of Jackie and the WPI, we now have 180 unique data points that really tell us how women give. The Women's Philanthropy Institute's important for you to know and understand. Jackie will talk more about it, but it is the place that understands and does the research that gender does matter in philanthropy, and then takes it into action. And that's what Jackie's role is now as the interim director. How do we translate that for donors, for fundraisers, and how to use the research in their day-to-day work to grow philanthropy? So today we're going to discuss the research. We're going to give you takeaways from that research. Then we're going to move to specific ways you can get started, regardless of the size of your nonprofit, large, small. There are specific ways you can just get curious and get started. And then what are the positive gains for doing this work? We'll give you some great examples. As they said, please keep putting your questions into the Q&A so that we can really tailor this for you when we get to the Q&A section. But first, we're going to kick it off with Jackie. And Jackie, what are the key highlights of the WPI's research and what are the trends?
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. And I want to thank Maryna and the Myriad USA team for having me and for pulling together this panel. So as Kathleen kindly introduced me earlier and said, at the Women's Philanthropy Institute, we have been studying gender and philanthropy for 15 plus years. And our research has shown some very consistent trends over all of the research that we've done. So some of the big picture items are, first of all, women are more likely than men to give to charity. That's true overall, and also to most specific subsectors or subject areas within philanthropy, like the arts, education, health, etc. And then also, women tend to give higher amounts overall when you compare similarly situated women and men. So women and men who have similar levels of wealth and income, women do tend to be more generous. And again, that is true overall and to specific areas and subject areas within philanthropy. Women and men are also motivated to give differently. Women give out of a sense of empathy, altruism. They are thinking about the individuals on the end of their giving, who's going to benefit, what causes, what individuals are going to benefit from that philanthropy. Compared to men who tend to give in a more transactional way, appears to be a little bit more self-interested motives. And by that, that can mean anything from influencing men to give by the benefits of giving, whether that's networking or prestige at work, to a benefit of giving, such as naming a building, or even just giving to causes that they know will ultimately benefit their own communities. And then finally, there are just some unique aspects of how women like to give. Women tend to give more collaboratively. They enjoy giving together and engaging deeply, both with each other and also with the organizations and individuals that benefit from their generosity.
That was a great overview. And I'm going to turn to you, Lyndi, to say, okay, so that's the research. How have you seen that research play out with your women's philanthropy group?
Thanks, Kathleen, and also thanks to Maryna and the Myriad USA, and of course, everybody that's joined this webinar, and we'll have some great questions for us. So when Jackie talks about women being more altruistic, that really resonates with me, because I know we'll talk a little bit later about how we started the group and maybe how others can kick off their own women's philanthropy group. But I will say, when we brought together kind of our founding group, we spent the first year just learning about international development. Mercy Corps has this broad mandate in international development, and they wanted to understand the issues, who would be impacted with sort of our collective giving, and how they could best make an impact in the world that they wanted to see. So it sounds like kind of a slow lead up, but we knew that, it was really clear they wanted to have this sisterhood. They wanted to have connections to each other. They wanted to learn from each other too. So in this first year of learning, we came together afterwards and we said, great, now we know a little bit more. How do we want to give? What do we want our group to be defined by? And so they ultimately decided, based on everything that they learned, that first of all, they wanted to focus on women internationally and climate, because that's such an overlooked kind of nexus area. And then the second kind of most important thing that I think we see with this altruistic piece is that they wanted to give in, I think, what we call in the philanthropy world, trust-based giving. So the traditional model of collective giving circles is you pool resources and then everyone decides it'll go to this nonprofit or it'll go to this cause. And instead they said, we're going to pool our funds and what we've raised from others. We're going to give it to Mercy Corps' team of experts to decide where it can best be used to position women as leaders in climate adaptation, because it comes from a place of not wanting to have their name or their stamp on a certain program. They want to help, and they want to do it in the best way possible. So I think when you're talking about altruism and collective giving, we really saw that come to the forefront just by them deciding to take a step back and practice that trust-based philanthropic model, which is quite unique and quite progressive.
Lyndi, you really talk about a community. They came together as a community and wanted to do good as a community. Jackie, I know that there is research on giving circles, and as I call them more broadly, giving communities coming together. Can you share with the group a little bit about that research?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, and then as Lyndi followed up, women often prefer to give collaboratively. Giving circles are a great example of this trend. So for those of you who might be less familiar, giving circles are essentially collective giving models where members will contribute a smaller amount of money. It gets pulled together, and then they grant out a larger total to nonprofits, often local ones. They can take a few different forms. The one Lyndi was mentioning is specifically to give to Mercy Corps. You have plenty of examples where people are getting together to support specific organizations, but then there are also, perhaps models where women and people get together to support broader causes and can vote, for example, on where that money is going. Why we are interested in giving circles at the Women's Philanthropy Institute is that the vast majority of giving circles are made up primarily of women, including a significant number that are really women-only groups that bring in mostly women donors. Our research indicates that these giving circles might be especially appealing to women because they align with this collaborative, community-driven philanthropy. There are opportunities for women to volunteer, to learn about different organizations and causes that are important in their local communities, et cetera. So these are all things that tie into what we know about how women give more broadly. I'll also note that, sometimes I get questions about giving circles and individual nonprofits are like, why should we care about them? They give to like 1 or 2 nonprofits a year. There are so many nonprofits in need in my community. Why should I even try to engage them? And the reason that we give is that women in giving circles are almost always philanthropic outside of just the financial gift that they give to that giving circle. So they're giving to other nonprofits, they're volunteering, they're serving on boards. And so even if your nonprofit doesn't get that grant, these are still really important groups of women to engage.
That's an important point you just brought up, Jackie, because what you're saying is that when they're in a community, they're actually learning, as you talked about, Lindsay. They're learning from each other. They're, in your case, learning from Mercy Corps, but they're also teaching each other. And I would say that there are far too few opportunities to learn about philanthropy, to understand philanthropy. We've got tons of stories and headlines about the big male gifts and only a few. So the more we can bring them together, they can hear each other. They say, oh, you did that. I could do that too. Let me join you. This joining is so important. So Lindsay, I'm going to turn it back to you and say, well, anyone listening might say, that sounds like a lot of work, all this joining and community, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about the benefits and how actually you have raised quite a bit of money.
Well, I think the key, as Jackie has mentioned, and you did too as well, Kathleen, is that sense of community, which we keep kind of harping on, and it sounds kind of easy, right? Like, oh, you put people in the same room and it'll be a community, but that's not how it works. It has to be really intentional. And I think our success has really been built on that foundation of community. And so what I will say is because Mercy Corps is a global nonprofit, our donor base is not localized. It's all across the country. And so we knew that we would have to rely on virtual tools to build a community, which is not an ideal way to do it, honestly. And to be, fully transparent, we have had a number of women interested in joining our Women's Philanthropy group, but they didn't want to do it virtually. So it can be quite a challenge to overcome. But I think the benefits definitely outweigh it, because we're able to, in an effort to create this community, the women were very clear. They don't want that community to look just like them, be from the same upbringing as them, have the same backgrounds as them. They wanted a diverse group of women to come together to learn from each other. And so when you have this kind of broader opportunity to bring people together, even if it is virtual, I think that helps you achieve those goals. So one thing that we do, we meet virtually quarterly for our meetings, and then we also have committees, so those are smaller groups, and then we also have a buddy system. So when somebody joins, they're assigned a buddy of somebody that's already been there and can kind of check in with them, answer any questions. And then I think this is a really important part too, is that as the director of the Women's Philanthropy group, I spend a lot of time just making phone calls and sending handwritten notes and emailing them on their son's graduation day or whatever it might be, because when you have those kind of personal connections, I can say, oh, you should connect with so-and-so about a job opportunity. And then you're creating some of those linkages that do feel more personal. And once you have those kind of friendships, and the women can rely on each other, and They look forward to seeing each other online. It's not just these anonymous faces, it's people you look forward to seeing on a quarterly basis and, catching up with briefly before the meetings start. So building that community where you can have open and honest conversations too, without fearing being judged, is also very, very essential to progressing, suggesting kind of crazy fundraising ideas without the fear of being judged. So that community piece is so critical. And I think really is reflected in the research that Jackie has shared so far.
So we've heard that women are giving more, they're altruistic, they prefer often, not always, to give together to have impact. Let's move in then to how we start with all that research. Like, what do we do day one to begin to get these individuals into a community where it's self-learning and self-growing and sustainable? So of course, I'm going to start with you, Lyndi. Where did you go start at Mercy Crow? And what did you learn as you started?
We learned that we were wrong about a lot of things, right? So I think the very first step is buy-in from the top. And I want to kind of emphasize that, because I think if you go to your supervisor, your CEO, whoever it might be, and say, hey, I'm going to start this women's giving circle and we want to raise a lot of money, they'll say, wow, that's great, do it. But it takes time. I told you, we spent our first year just learning, not doing fundraising, right? So get that buy-in from the top and manage expectations that this will be something, but we're building it. So that, that gives you time to learn from the women in your group as well. That's the first thing I'd say. And then I'd also say, when the Women's Philanthropy group was born in the pandemic, like so many other virtual teams, we wanted to find a way to bring women closer to Mercy Corps, to international development. We thought, we've got this great idea. We're going to start a women's philanthropy group. We're going to invite our major gift donors, and then we'll just see how fast it grows. This is going to be great. But when we interviewed women, so we interviewed a few women who were really engaged with Mercy Corps already, and said, this is what we're thinking of doing. What would get you excited? And they said, that's not interesting at all. So we really had to take a step back and say, okay, tell us what would be interesting, something that you'd be excited to build at Mercy Corps. And listen to these women, because they have an idea. A lot of them are in other giving circles or other philanthropic groups, or have friends that are a part of something that they want to build as well. So really listen to them, and they can help you build it from the ground up. So once we started understanding that they wanted that diverse array, they didn't want just major gift donors, because, Kathleen, to your point earlier, a lot of major gift donors are a little bit of a homogenous group, right? And a different age bracket, often for Mercy Corps, they're coastal. So we really wanted to bring in people from all different ages, backgrounds, geographies, etc. So that was a first start that we learned. Day one, get leadership buy-in. Day two, start interviewing people that you think might want to be involved, but listen, don't tell them what the group is going to be. Ask them what they would want to be a part of. Once you kind of lay the foundation for that, say, do you want to help us build something, and let's get started. And I think you'll really see great ideas start to formulate, and a lot of enthusiasm and buy-in generated.
On mute. There's no doubt that there's enthusiasm. I've seen that over now tens and tens of organizations who've started women's philanthropy. But there was the first point you made that I want to underscore, which is, how do you talk to the leaders? How do you get them engaged? And if you all heard how Lyndi spoke, there's a lot of curiosity there. Curious on their own assumptions. Why wasn't it working? Curious on asking questions. But getting curious about your own data is also a very good place as well. Curiosity breaks through our assumptions. I used to work at the Red Cross, and everyone always assumed people will only give to disasters, and they don't transfer their giving beyond disasters. And yet when we got curious and did, just on a different topic, interviews, focus groups, listened deeply to the donors, we found that yes, they would convert to everyday donors if they could see programs that linked to where they could have impact beyond disasters. So that curiosity broke an assumption at the American Red Cross, changed how we do our fundraising. Curiosity here breaks assumptions about how women give. There's a lot of myths. Women don't give so much. Women are hard to fundraise for. They ask a lot of questions. And yet, when we're curious and bring this community together, the way Jackie and Lyndi have talked about, we find we actually gather strength and gather all of their resources. So another humanitarian organization, I want to give you an example, started by looking at their data to convince their leaders they needed to invest in this. When they looked at the data, and by the way, they mainly are fundraised through segmented direct mail, so not even a ton of relationships. But when they looked at that data, they found more women than men were giving, and they were giving more frequently, such that actually women were surpassing the total that men were giving. Their total bigger than the men's total. However, it was not seen. They had not caught that before they looked at their data because each of those gifts were smaller. They thought women were giving less. So that data, that curiosity led them to start doing exactly what Lyndi was talking about, that they needed to learn more. Why were they giving? What made a difference? How do they want to have impact? So they really did that curious asking, bringing people together. Among 20 that they interviewed, then they did find their top few that would help them really create a program that would be scintillating and compelling for those who identified as women. And so they found what I call their leadership champions, just like you talk about, Lyndi. Who are those who are going to be your partner to drive this forward? And those leadership champions are everything to you because they really add to your own bandwidth, your staff. You can't do it all, but the leadership champions are going to roll up their sleeves and they're going to be helping you do it. So this idea of being curious, of looking, of not assuming, of convincing your leaders that we've got some untapped potential here is something that we can provide you as resources. So Jackie, can you talk about WPI's website with tools and resources called Proven Practices?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Kathleen. So I think we'll have that show up in the chat here, but the URL is wpiproovenpractices.indianapolis.iu.edu. So I'll make sure that's in the chat for everyone. But the whole concept behind this site, it's assessment that really anyone at any point in their career can take to understand where you might start in growing women's philanthropy at your organization. So it's really hands-on. Thank you, Maryna. It includes videos, templates, other materials to get started. And just want to give all the credit, if we can, to Kathleen. She literally wrote the book on how to apply our research to practice. And this website is a very close partnership between WPI and Kathleen, and really relies on her work in the field. So just want to highlight the whole concept behind the site are these 6 principles that Kathleen developed through her career for growing women's philanthropy. I'll just overview them briefly. They are described in much more detail on the site, and I'm sure we can talk about this further if that's desired. But the first principle is that strategy begins with insight. And I just love how Lyndi called back to several of these as she was talking about her experience with their women's philanthropy group. Strategy begins with insight. Their whole first year was a year of learning. And that's really important to sit back, understand your own data, and understand what the research in the field says. The second principle is that women's input is key. Again, calling back to Lyndi, they interviewed women. They interviewed their major women donors, their women leaders. If you're not listening to women and you're just kind of designing a program for them, there's not really a good way to tell if they'll want what you're giving them. So you really need to talk to them. Third principle is that women give more than money. We've talked about that in our research quite a bit, but finding ways for women to engage with your organization beyond just donating. If there are leadership opportunities or opportunities to volunteer, etc. fourth principle is that leadership involvement is pivotal. I'll just call back to both Lyndi and Kathleen. If you don't have your leadership signed on, we've talked to so many frontline fundraisers who are like all in on women's philanthropy, and they haven't convinced their leadership yet. And so all of that motivation really goes nowhere. On this proven practices site, if that is an area where you need to improve, or you need to figure out how to get your leadership on board, this has really concrete ways for you to look at your own data, arguments for you to help make that case to your own leadership. And then the last couple principles are, first of all, starting reveals the path forward. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit. What's the first step? And then finally, the work is evolutionary. There's no one endpoint. You don't really get to a point where you say, you know, I've checked the box on engaging women as donors, we're done. So even if you are instituting a women's philanthropy group, you always want to take the time to circle back to think about your progress to date. Where could you improve? Where could you grow the services, the connection opportunities that you're providing to your women donors? So really encourage you to check out that website, and would love any feedback or stories about how you are using that information and those resources to either start or improve your own women's philanthropy programs.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Lyndi. These are the resources we want you to be able to roll up your sleeves and work with. But let me ask both Lyndi and Jackie, is there anything else that you would add besides that website, besides being curious? Just kind of quick takeaways of how to get started. Lyndi, do you have anything else?
I think one thing I wanted to comment on from Jackie's practices that she shared is the element of, I think when we think of a philanthropy group, we think of collective giving, right? That is what it is. But the women that you involve in your group bring so much to your organization beyond financial resources. And I know your CEO and your supervisors are like, great, we have, you know, lots of volunteers, but we need money, right? I know that is pressure from the top, but I will tell you that every single member of our women's philanthropy group brings different levels of giving. We ask them to make a multi-year pledge of personal significance, which can look very different to any woman, but they all have so much energy, enthusiasm, ideas, real experience. Some of them are brand marketers, you know, they help push our message out. Some of them are really good at social media, which I need so much help with, and I lean on them really hard. Some of them have fundraising experience, nonprofit experience, network. So I also just really want to encourage anybody on this call to not be distracted by the dollar signs. It is important and it is center stage, but every woman that comes to your group wants to get involved, wants to volunteer in some way. And once they're an ambassador of your organization and your cause, they have countless ways. Kathleen, I think you mentioned it almost makes your work exponential, because then they are helping you do your work, helping make introductions, hosting events. Really, the women in our group are absolutely amazing women and are so eager to help build on our collective impact. So I think that was just the one thing I wanted to add to Jackie's best practices for a women's philanthropy group, is that women bring so much to the table beyond just donations.
I'll just briefly, Kathleen, if I may say, you know, as someone who's focused mostly on research and not on doing the fundraising work, sometimes I'll sit in these webinars and I'll think, you know, if I were new to the field, I would be so overwhelmed. You know, you want me to start a women's philanthropy program? I'm already working more than 40 hours a week. I have all of these goals and targets to hit. I think that a great thing about the Proven Practices website is that it offers kind of bite-sized chunks for us to take. You know, the first step is look at your own data. That doesn't have to take, more than an hour. Look at your own data, understand how women are already engaging with your organization, and then just kind of take little bits of time and grow from there. So I think that anyone, whether you're at, a one-person fundraising a development department or a huge office, can take these principles and move forward with them. The important thing is that you're doing something with them, not that you're, doing everything at once.
Perfect, Jackie. That's what I would have wanted to add, because it is step by step. And that is how you've grown the research over 15 years. And now we know there's 180 plus data points. Lyndi, you've grown it at Mercy Corps, and how I've seen dozens and dozens of organizations grow it over 2 to 3 years, 4 or 5, some are on their 20th. So now let's get to, well, what are the results? It's really important, I think, for you to know, and your leaders to know, what's possible when you start focusing on those who identify as women and really welcome in all the resources that we're talking about. I'm actually going to start with my story. Jackie's heard this, but it's important because here I am, right? A student of women's philanthropy, steeped in it, working with the Women's Philanthropy Institute. And yet in the middle of all that, I had my 35th college reunion, and the university, because I'd worked there, was doing all their normal reunion emails and calls, and here's our goal, and here's our deadline, and you gave this last time, so will you consider to give this time? And of course I was going to give. It's my alma mater, and many of my family went there. So, but those of you who know June 30th deadlines know that when it came June 12th and I had not yet given, of course I got another call, but this call was different. Didn't matter if it was a male or a female, this person did what Lindy's talking about. She said, Kathleen, we know that it's your reunion year, and we're curious, what values do you have that you want to see in your philanthropy if you choose to give to your alma mater this year? What programs are you interested in that we can tell you more about? This questioning, this going back and forth, took all of 5 minutes. I was going to give anyway, but I surprised myself that even knowing all of women's philanthropy, the fact that I felt seen, the fact that I got a few questions to me in the consideration of my gift, led me to give 3 times more than I was going to give. That's the power of what we're talking about. And that's the power of just starting with curiosity, with questions, with asking, how do you see us and how do you want to be involved? So I really want to go to you, Lyndi, and talk about your own surprises, right? That was a surprise to me personally, steeped in the research. What are some surprises and outcomes that have happened at Mercy Corps?
I think if I had to choose one thing that's most surprising about our women's philanthropy group is I'm trying to think of what it is. The sisterhood. I don't know if that's the right word for it. It feels a little like not a word we use anymore, but I will say that these women have come together for a collective cause. We've raised over $500,000 for women in climate related causes for Mercy Corps. And that's not just from members giving, that's from fundraising from outside sources, or we funded a program in Senegal, for example, with our pooled funds. It brought in 900,000 euro follow-on funding. So seeing the impact that our pilot programs can have on women across the world that we'll never meet, and their lives will be changed because we came together, is really, really, really powerful. And those are the kinds of results and impact that build that bond and that closeness in the women's philanthropy group. And I love how I was meeting one member for coffee one day, and she pulled into the parking lot. I could see she was on the phone, so I was just waiting, and she said, oh, I was just on the phone with another member of the group. So they are contacting each other on their own, and building these relationships. And one woman is looking for a job, and so she's in touch with somebody that works in that same kind of industry within the group. This is the power of what women can do, not just for Mercy Corps' cause, not just for our mission of elevating women globally, but also for each other, So I don't know if women coming together and doing something really powerful should have been a surprise, but I think I think when we initially kicked off, we could have never expected these kinds of results and success so soon.
So soon is actually a great piece here. 500,000 in 2 years, that much level of enthusiasm and passion, the net gain to themselves personally as well as to Mercy Corps, that's a lot in 2 years. I would say, wow, but to be honest, that is pretty much what I see regularly.
Yeah.
And it is all because I understand that people are welcoming in the fullness that those who identify as women are wanting to give. So Jackie, I'm going to turn to you and break it down. We're talking about all the ways they give, but give us what we call now the 7 T's and why we need to keep all that in place with, as Lyndi said, the principle being dollars, yes, but still everything else builds together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kathleen. So depending on how long you've been in the field, you might have heard of the 3 T's, the 5 T's, the 7 T's. Maybe there's more by now. I haven't heard of them yet, but essentially those are time, talent, treasure are kind of the 3 that we've all generally heard of. So giving of your financial resources, and then also of your time, volunteering, serving on a board, etc. The next few are ties. So your networks, connecting, even if you're not able to give a certain amount, finding someone in your network to connect to this cause or this organization who can also donate or also engage. Testimony, stories, or amplification, whether you are talking on social media about a cause that you care about, or, for those of us who have a larger platform, are engaging broader audiences, et cetera, but just kind of telling your story of why you're engaged with this organization or cause. The last 2 are trust and transparency. We could probably talk all day about trust-based philanthropy, but essentially the idea is that women resonate with this concept of trusting the nonprofits that they support. So not asking them to report back to a burdensome extent, but really saying you're closest to the problem. Here is this grant, this gift. Go do what you need to with it, and engaging with the nonprofit, but not to the extent that it's burdensome for them. And then finally, transparency kind of goes both ways. We want nonprofits that we donate to be transparent with us as donors. But also nonprofits really benefit from a donor who's transparent, who you can have an honest conversation with, who can say, I can give you this now, I can give you this over 3 years, 5 years, what would be most helpful to you. This is my motivation. I want to give a one-time gift. Don't bother soliciting me in the future. We want a donor who can be very transparent about all of the aspects of their gift. And that transparency as a donor is a gift to the organization. So in short, the idea of the 7 T's is that women want to give with all of their resources, with their entire self. And yes, that's financial, but it's also non-financial. It's their networks, their stories, their expertise. And when we only value the dollars, it's a turnoff to a lot of women. And we want these non-financial resources to be valued by those that we're giving them to as well. I'll just say, not being a fundraiser myself, I don't have a lot of my own real life examples, but I'll just note that, we've all heard of Melinda French Gates, Mackenzie Scott. They're very high profile billionaire women donors that have been in the news a lot lately. I have seen in interviews where each of them have explicitly said, don't name a building after me, don't want it. It's actually a negative thing if you offer that to me in a solicitation. And this goes back to our research on why women give, what motivates them to give, what they want to get out of that gift. They don't want to get a name on the building. They want to know about the students or, whomever is benefiting from that gift. So Melinda and Mackenzie are not everyday donors, but they do represent these broader principles of women's philanthropy, where we want to place the spotlight onto the causes and organizations that are receiving the benefit rather than donors themselves.
That's really well said, Jackie. If you also look at their gifts, particularly, there's a lot of trust there. They do their research and then they're all in. So we want to, yes, use them, but there are many, many, many still unwritten about donors, like these wonderful 2 donors that we have in our very roles, our donor files, that we get to learn more about and have them be able to come forward too. So let's just close with a quick go round. I'll start with you, Lyndi, and then Jackie, and I'll close on just one more thing that you would want to make sure this audience really hears from this conversation.
Keep it women-led. They know what they're doing. You're going to learn a lot from them. You might think you're the director and have all these great ideas that you're going to teach them, but it's a little bit backwards. You're going to learn a lot from them if you let them lead the way. They'll come up with ideas, fundraising opportunities, networking ideas, event ideas that have never crossed your mind. So not only do you get this wealth of ideas and new things you can try, but it also creates that buy-in and that ownership that is really important, I think, to propel the group forward. So I'll keep it short and simple, keep it women-led. There are brilliant women that you will be pulling into your circle, and you want to listen to them. And to your point, they want to be seen and they want to be heard. And the only way you can go is to excel by following that pattern.
Thank you, Lyndi. Jackie?
I'll just say that do something. The first step to take today is the one that you're actually going to follow through on, instead of I'm going to build a women's philanthropy program. You're often the only person doing development at your organization. You have limited bandwidth. So the bad news is that we know from our research that women are overlooked at literally every stage of the fundraising process, from prospect research all the way to making the ask and following up with thank yous and continued relationships with these donors. The good news is that no matter what your role is, you can do something to improve that at your organization. Whether it's looking at your donor database to see how women are represented. If you're someone who talks to donors, who takes a lot of meetings with major donors, maybe it's looking at your calendar for next week and saying, okay, let me check in with them. Are there any spouses or other family members that they might want to bring into this meeting that I haven't really asked about? It might be just putting an hour of time on your calendar to go over proven practices, our website, and see what your next step might be. So I always think, don't be overwhelmed. Just take one next step, and the right next step for you is whichever one you can fit into your calendar and within your existing bandwidth.
Thank you, Jackie. Always so practical. And that is exactly true. And so I think that's how everyone started, as I've worked with many, many, many nonprofits. They just started someplace and looked and got curious. And I really want to applaud what you said, Lyndi. It's about partnerships. You're bringing in partners that you together are trusting each other, conversing honestly, looking at opportunities. And that is such a high and also an opportunity to extend beyond your head down, got to hit this goal. We're breaking through better practice. We're breaking through old practices and moving into better practices, which is really just what donors want. They do not want to be seen. Anyone does not want to be seen as a walking wallet or a pocketbook. They want to be seen as full human beings who care to make a huge difference in causes they care about. And when we invite them in with respect, curiosity, and one step at a time, they will bring us and you extraordinary results. So have confidence. Know it's doable. We've broken it down for you. Many, many peers are doing this. Just get out and look and start. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Maryna, now to answer questions, because there's probably a lot about how to start and what they're thinking.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, everyone. I think people have resonated and find the practical tips relevant, because we have quite a few questions. So I want to make sure we get some of your insights to those. First question is actually specifically for Lyndi. we've mentioned the trust-based approach, and Jackie as well, you've elaborated that the goal is here not to burden the organizations with reporting and so on. But the interesting question is, what does that approach look like at Mercy Corps? What does the feedback loop look like? So how do you maybe inform the group about the work after giving?
We've learned a lot in our first couple of years about this too. So this is a really good question. When we set off to do this kind of trust-based philanthropy model, we'll pool our funds. Here you go, Mercy Corps. Make sure it empowers women in climate adaptation. The team was able to direct that to this wonderful program. I mentioned it brought on follow-on funding. We're now funding another program. So they've done a really good job at that. But what we failed to do, and what we will be changing moving forward, is that even though women didn't want to be making the decisions, they didn't, sitting in the US on a virtual Zoom call, they didn't feel like they should be the ones making the decision if a woman's life in Haiti or, Myanmar is changed, right? Who are we? So that's why they really leaned into the trust-based philanthropy model, which I think is extraordinary. But what we weren't doing enough of is showing them the decision-making process. And so I think that was a really, really good lesson for me. Once again, I continue to learn so much from these women. But what we'll be doing going forward is, even though the women have been clear, they don't want to make the decisions, they'd like to see how the decisions are made. So why did we choose the program in Senegal? Why did we choose the program in Iraq, for example? And just learn from, the Mercy Corps experts about why it's being directed one way or the other. What other programs were they considering, and why did this one get elevated to the top? So that feedback loop that the attendee has asked about needs to be improved. And so we'll be moving forward, we'll be including them in, I'll say, the decision-making process, but showing them how the steps are made. And then we do provide 2 reports each year, halfway through, and then at the conclusion of the program. And then we include, photos, captions throughout as well, just for quick highlights. If women ever have direct questions about the program, we do phone calls and direct connections as well.
Yeah, great. Next question, and I'll try to sort of speed through them so we get as many answered as possible. But this question could really become another webinar, but I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts. Are any of you engaging Gen Z women or younger millennials? If yes, what are you finding?
I can speak to the cross number of groups, like nonprofits and universities and large NGOs. And I would say yes, and yes, and yes. As Lindy mentioned, I'm seeing that there is a desire for diversity, and the 80-year-old boomers are thrilled to talk to the 30-year-olds. The 30-year-olds are thrilled to be part of a larger, diverse group of women, so they can see, how did they navigate their jobs? How did they navigate the balance of family, work, etc. And that's all outside of philanthropy. But then within philanthropy, it's a true community when there is a lot of diversity and growth and sharing of stories, etc. So pretty much, maybe 15 years ago, when I started really digging into how to move this in action, it was more homogeneous, as Lindy talked about, more all baby boomers. And now I see the diversity is quite remarkable across the board, across the race, across the capacity to give. And it's giving even more depth, I would say, to their learning and to their philanthropy.
Okay, great. Then next question is, I think, more for Jackie, but also Kathleen. But let's see. How do we encourage, support documentation of women in philanthropy, especially their contribution towards local philanthropy? We have found it very difficult to know and or track women's contribution towards philanthropy in Africa.
Yeah, that's so that's a problem that we have found everywhere. Basically, data is the data availability or lack of data is the biggest hindrance to us in doing our work. It's also why a lot of our research is about philanthropy and gender in the US. although we'd like to expand our knowledge, you know, it's really hard to get the same level and depth of data in a lot of places. So, and some places are harder than others. There's some European countries, Canada is tracking this relatively well. But where you find poor data infrastructure in other places, it's going to be poor for fundraising and philanthropy as well. I would say if you're at an individual institution, you can make a change within your institution. You can start to collect better data, more in-depth data, more updated data. And what I would say is really important from the gender perspective or the women's philanthropy perspective is making sure that you are understanding household giving. So when a woman gives a gift, you can tell. When a man gives a gift, you can tell it's man. When a household gives a gift, it's really hard to tell who is driving that giving. And so it's important to kind of document your conversations to make sure that you are giving credit for that gift to both the man and the woman if they're in a traditional heterosexual household. And it's important to just note, you know, it's her alma mater, or we're giving to his alma mater, but to a cause within that school that she cares about, you know. So it's important to get that nuance down when you're making recordings of all of this information as well.
What I would add to that is just ask. And you can use the research and simply say, we know from research at WPI that women give more than men, but we also know it's just harder to understand and know it all. So tell me your story. Where else do you give? What's important to you? Where do we fall on your list of support that you want to provide? One of the resources in proven practices is a list of questions that you can ask. And these are not imposing questions. People actually resonate positively when they're asked about their philanthropy because no one ever asks them, and they put a lot of thought into it. So again, back to partnership, when you ask questions that are curious and leaning into, who are you? What do you care about? Including your other philanthropy, there's often a positive response and you gain so much.
Yeah, great. So we have, I think, time for 2 more questions. One, more practical, and I'm looking at you, Lyndi, I think. What is a realistic timeline for the engagement and then donations actually coming in? And generally, what is the resource you invest in the meantime? So having a full-time person, a part-time person. So I guess I would just also ask, how do you set the target goals? How do you evaluate the progress? Or, I mean, this all depends on the size of the organization and the beneficiaries and such, but if you have any insights on that.
Yeah, I'll start with, you know, how much of my role is dedicated to this giving circle. When we started, it was a side hustle, right? Like I was a high impact philanthropy fundraiser with an individual portfolio. And this was kind of my side gig. But as it grew and as we formed committees and as we formed timelines and as we built codes of conduct, you know, it took over more. And so today my job title is the director of the Women's Philanthropy Group, and I still have a portfolio of individual donors. So I will say that to get started, it doesn't need to be a full-time job. I bet in, you know, when we first started out, when we had meetings, I was dedicating maybe 20 hours-ish in a month to preparation and everything, but now it's taking up more time. So, and we only had meetings, you know, quarterly. So it really wasn't even a part-time job. So I will say to start out, it can very much be just somebody who's super excited and really engaged can take it on as part of their workload. And then, I'm sorry, Maryna, the second part of, or the first part of the question was how long from engagement to donation, is that right?
Yeah.
I think when you're having those initial kind of discovery calls with women that might want to be involved, it's okay to ask them what they think. You know, it's okay to say, we want to get this started and we want this to be meaningful. If you ask them for a donation at the very front, you could risk them, you know, offering a lower amount than they would after they're really involved and super excited, right? So I think it's okay to ask them, is this something that you would want to support initially to help us like really start to make our impact? Or would you like to, in 6 months revisit this conversation and you'll have a better idea? So I would say jumping the gun too early could be disadvantageous, but in that trust-based relationship model, ask them. They'll tell you. That transparency that Jackie and Kathleen have mentioned, just having these really open and honest conversations and respecting what they say and building off of it. So it could be immediate, but I would anticipate you'll be better off to revisit that conversation, 3-6 months down the road once they really understand what your purpose is coming together.
Yeah, thank you, Lyndi. We're right on time, but I just want to make sure we answer one last question, Jackie, for you, because we have a diverse thematic areas in the room, people working in universities, museums, health clinics, and so on. Would be helpful to know what are some key areas of interest that women philanthropists tend to prioritize.
Thank you. So I know we're at time, so I'll be brief. I mentioned that women are more likely to give and give higher amounts to basically every charitable subsector. So no matter where you work in the charitable world, in the nonprofit world, you should be focusing on women donors. That said, we know that women tend to be particularly interested in organizations that serve youth, that serve family, health organizations, and they're also interested in international causes. And also our recent research shows that they're disproportionately interested in women's and girls' causes, which is an area of emerging research. And the benefit to that is that these can be part of any kind of traditional subsector. You can have women's health, art programs for women and girls, et cetera. And so no matter where you sit in that nonprofit world, when you can kind of focus on the programs that you have that benefit or serve women and girls, you're more likely to engage women donors.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jackie, for doing it quickly, but this is really insightful. And now I'd just like to take a moment to close the webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us today and staying a little bit over. I hope we all found this webinar very also inspiring and kind of inspiring to take action and to think about the work that you do at your organizations. We truly value your feedback. So if you please take a moment, it takes under 30 seconds to fill out our survey. Maybe there are some topics, some comments that were said today and you felt like, oh, this could be a whole webinar. We would love to know that and provide the content for you. So make sure you send us your comments. And then our next live webinar, how to ask and get exactly what you want, will be held on September 8th. Be sure to register to learn more how to ask anyone for anything with comfort, confidence, and ease from Laura Fredericks, CEO and the founder of The Ask and an international consultant. And if you have any questions at all, please reach out to us at info@myriadusa.org, connect with us and the panelists on LinkedIn. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us and the panelists for taking their time to share insights. I'll let everyone go because we're definitely over time, but I appreciate all of your comments and questions. And thank you again, and have a good rest of your day and week.
Thank you, Maryna. Thank you, Myriad. Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Yeah. Bye-bye.